You may not believe that poverty can push a man toward choices that make his heart pound with fear and tremble with hope at the same time. You may not believe that sometimes fate knocks on our door in ways no one could ever predict. But it's the truth. And this is the story of Mason Calloway. Mason was a single father working as a janitor at the headquarters of Aldridge Holdings in Austin, Texas, a man whom life had pushed all the way to the edge. Every morning, Mason woke up before the sun even had the chance to rise, not because of an alarm clock, but because of the dry cough coming from the small room next door. Ellie, his 6-year-old daughter with crystal blue eyes, carried a congenital heart condition that needed urgent surgery. And Mason? He had nothing but a pair of calloused hands and a mountain of medical debt weighing on him like the sky collapsing on his shoulders. Mason's life hadn't always been this bleak. 3 years ago, he had a family. A small house in suburban Austin, a steady job at an auto repair shop, and a wife he believed would walk with him for the rest of his life. Dana. But everything fell apart the day the doctor told them Ellie needed heart surgery, a surgery that costs more than $200,000. Insurance wouldn't cover it. And Dana? She looked at Mason with cold eyes and said a sentence that felt like someone squeezing his heart until it cracked. I can't live like this anymore. She left, not because she didn't love Ellie, but because she wasn't strong enough to stand in the middle of a storm that big. She chose another life, with another man, in another city. And Mason? He stayed, because that was the only thing he knew how to do. He sold the house, paid off a portion of the debt, moved into a cramped apartment on the east side of the city, and took a janitor position at Aldridge Holdings, one of the largest financial corporations in Texas, simply because the pay was slightly higher, and they allowed him to work night shifts so he could be with Ellie during the day. Every night, when the skyscraper sank into silence, Mason wiped every glass panel, polished every marble floor, cleaned offices so luxurious he knew he would never sit in them. And every night, when he walked past the 47th floor, the top floor of the building, he always saw a light still on. It was the office of Caroline Aldridge. Caroline wasn't just the CEO of Aldridge Holdings. She was the owner, the heiress, the most powerful female billionaire in Texas. Rumor had it she could buy an entire town without blinking, that she once fired an executive simply because he dared to look her in the eye, that she had never smiled in front of any employee. Mason had never spoken to her. He had never even been within 10 meters of her. For a man like him, Caroline Aldridge belonged to another world. A world of private jets, lavish galas, and decisions that could change the fate of thousands. But everything changed one night in October. That night, Mason was wiping the stairs on the 46th floor when his phone buzzed. It was the hospital. The nurse's voice made his heart stop. Mr. Calloway, Ellie's condition is worsening. The doctor says the surgery can't wait any longer. We need your answer within a week. Mason collapsed onto the steps, the phone still in his hand. 1 week. He needed $200,000 in 1 week. And his bank account didn't even have $300. He had no idea how long he sat there. Maybe a few minutes. Maybe an hour. Tears streamed down his face, and he didn't bother wiping them away. Then a voice, cold, sharp as a blade, echoed above him. What are you doing here? Mason looked up. Caroline Aldridge stood at the top of the staircase, staring down at him. A perfect black suit, blonde hair in a tight bun, icy blue eyes. I'm sorry, ma'am. Mason jumped to his feet, hastily wiping his tears. I'll get back to work right away. But Caroline didn't leave. She stood there, looking at him as if she were reading an open book. You work the night shift, correct? Yes, ma'am. Mason Calloway. I've been here 8 months. Caroline stayed silent for a moment, then spoke, her voice not loud but powerful enough to hush the entire stairwell. Tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock. My office. Before he could ask anything, she turned away, the sound of her heels echoing through the vast empty space. That night, Mason couldn't sleep. He lay on the old sofa, staring at the peeling ceiling, wondering what he had done wrong. Was she going to fire him for crying on the job? If he lost this job, what else did he have left? At 7 the next morning, Mason stood in front of the glass doors of the 47th floor. He had never seen this place during the day. Texas sunlight poured through the massive windows, making the office look like a palace. Caroline's secretary led him in. The office was as big as his entire apartment. Marble floors, a black oak desk. A full wall of glass overlooked Austin, where other buildings looked like miniature toys. Caroline sat behind her desk. She didn't invite him to sit. She simply looked at him, then pushed a brown leather briefcase forward. "Open it." Mason took the briefcase with trembling hands. Inside was a thick folder, and the moment he flipped to the first page, his heart nearly stopped. It was Ellie's medical file, the diagnosis, the treatment plan, the surgery cost, every detail. Where did you get this?" Mason choked. Caroline didn't answer. She stood, walked toward the window, her back facing him. "I can help your daughter, Mason. I can pay for the entire surgery, erase all your debts, give you and your child a new home, a new life." Mason stood frozen, as if his soul had left his body. What he heard was too big to be real. Then Caroline turned, her blue eyes sharp and cold. "But in return," she said, each word falling like metal hitting the ground, "you must give me something. Something money can't buy." The room suddenly felt so heavy that Mason could barely breathe. What is it, ma'am?" Caroline walked closer. Close enough for him to smell her expensive perfume. Close enough for him to see the tired folds around her eyes. And in a voice that didn't tremble at all, she said, "I want you to give me a child. If you're still listening at this point, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next part, where the truth behind Caroline's offer begins to unfold. But what Mason doesn't know is that the real reason Caroline needs a child is far more bitter and dangerous than he could ever imagine. Can you guess what it is? We will continue right after this. Mason stood there like a statue. He was certain he had misheard. "Ma'am, I don't understand." Caroline returned to her desk, sitting down with the poise of someone far too familiar with controlling everything around her. "You heard me perfectly well, Mason. I don't like repeating myself." "But why? You could have anyone. You could what?" Caroline cut him off, her voice sharp. "Hire a surrogate? Find a man from the upper class? Do you think I haven't tried?" She opened a drawer and pulled out another file, thicker than Ellie's. 15 years, Mason. 15 years I've been searching for a man I could trust. And do you know what I found? She tossed the file onto the desk. Papers spilled out. Covert photos, prenuptial contracts, private investigation reports. The first one, a lawyer in Dallas, secretly signed a deal with a rival firm right before proposing to me. The second, a doctor supposedly respectable, turned out to be dating 3 other women at the same time. The third... Caroline paused. For the first time, Mason saw something different in her eyes. Not anger, pain. The third was Richard Mercer, son of a prestigious family. Handsome, charming, said exactly what I wanted to hear. I nearly married him. She stood and walked to the window, looking down at the city of Austin slowly waking beneath the morning sun. One day before the wedding, I found a prenuptial agreement he had hidden in his briefcase. He'd hired his own lawyer to draft it, with clauses that, if I signed, would give him control of 30% of my assets the moment we married. Mason stayed silent. He didn't know what to say. That was when I understood, Caroline continued, her voice lower. No one wants me. They only want what I have. My name, my wealth, my power. No one sees Caroline. They only see the Aldridge name. She turned and looked directly at Mason. But you're different. Me? Mason couldn't hide his shock. I'm just the janitor, ma'am. Exactly. Caroline nodded. You're the only person in this building who wants nothing from me. You don't flatter. You don't try to get close. You even avoid looking at me whenever I pass by. I just thought that was polite. That's honesty. Caroline stepped closer. 8 months, Mason. I've watched you for 8 months. You work hard. You never complain. You don't steal, not even a pen. And every night at exactly 11, you video call your daughter, no matter how exhausted you are. Mason felt stripped bare. She knew everything about him. I also know about Dana, Caroline said, her tone softening slightly. I know when she left, with whom, and where she is now. I know you have never said one bad word about her in front of Ellie, no matter what she did. Ellie doesn't need to know, Mason murmured. She's lost enough already. Caroline looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded, as if he had just passed an invisible test. That's why I chose you. You're not perfect, but you're decent. And in my world, decency is rarer than diamonds. She pulled the chair across from her and sat down, for the first time at eye level with Mason. I'm 41, Mason. My biological clock is counting down. The board of directors, those old men who worked with my father before I was even born, are waiting for me to fail. They want me to be heirless so they can tear apart the company my father spent his life building. So you need a child to prove the Aldridge legacy will continue, Caroline nodded. And I need a father I can trust, someone who isn't greedy, someone without political ambitions, someone who will disappear once it's all over, living his own life with enough money to never look back. Mason felt as if he were standing at a cliff's edge. On one side were all the values he'd been raised with: honor, integrity, dignity. On the other side was his daughter, lying in a hospital bed, counting down the days. What if I refuse? Caroline tilted her head slightly, her gaze unwavering. Then you may walk away. No one will ever know about this conversation. You'll continue working as usual. And she paused, I'll find another way. And Ellie? That is not my concern. Caroline's voice turned icy again. I am offering a business deal, Mason, not charity. Mason lowered his head. He looked down at his worn work boots, then at Caroline's expensive heels. 2 worlds, brutally opposite. I need time to think. Caroline stood and returned behind her desk. You have 24 hours, she said, without looking at him. After that, this door closes forever. Mason walked out of the office like a sleepwalker. The secretary eyed him with curiosity, but asked nothing. The elevator carried him down, returning him to the world of ordinary people. But Mason knew, from that moment on, he was no longer ordinary. He had been invited into a game whose rules he did not understand. And the price of losing might be his daughter's life. On the 47th floor, Caroline stood by the window, watching Mason's small figure step out of the building. She hadn't told him everything. She hadn't mentioned the sleepless nights in her empty penthouse, the echo of her own voice in rooms far too large, the feeling of being surrounded by hundreds of employees, yet having not a single friend. And she hadn't mentioned what Dr. Harrison Cole told her 2 weeks ago, that if she wanted a child, this might be her last chance. That time was no longer on her side. That sometimes those who have everything are the ones who have lost the most. Caroline placed her hand on the cold glass, looking down at the city she nearly owned. And for the first time in many years, she wondered whether there was something in this world that money truly couldn't buy. The answer, she knew, now rested in the hands of a janitor. Mason couldn't remember how he drove home. When he pushed open the door of the small apartment, the smell of medicine and thin porridge hit him immediately. His mother, Lorraine, was sitting beside Ellie's bed, patiently feeding her granddaughter spoon by spoon. "Your dad's home," she said, her voice warm but weighed down by exhaustion. At 72, her hand